Thank you very much. I'm really grateful and honored to have been invited to speak at this amazing forum. Again, just like Sharon had started off with, it is a very difficult topic that I've been asked to talk about, and that's neocolonialism. Because everyone here would know what happened with colonialism, so people don't really like to go back to that part of history that no one is proud of. Development, the word development, is perhaps the most discussed theme at international gatherings. It is also the most universally desired goal in the so-called developing countries. It is what unites nations on a continent so far away, like Africa, with nations in Latin America. All of us striving towards economic growth, infrastructure development, and scientific advancements that will ensure the well-being of our people. So our pursuit of development has brought our nations to a pathway of promise that has also, unfortunately, led to the subordination of our developing countries. I am speaking of the pathway of long-term aid dependence. So aid dependence has put our independent nations at the mercy of wealthier, mostly Western nations of Europe and of North America. About $140 billion with a B dollars goes to aiding developing countries each year, a gesture which seems rather generous, but which can and has indeed become the gateway to ideological colonialism. So in other words, the donors' dollars, euros, and pounds have brought us through a pathway mapped out for us to the gateway of neocolonialism. So wealthy Western nations, Western organizations, private foundations have become stakeholders and key players in most of the capitals of developing countries as they plan and propose ideologically driven projects that have not in any way, and in most of the cases, been solicited or demanded by the majority of our people. This is what I have observed and witnessed in Africa as I have traveled through different parts of the African continent, and I've gone through different regions, and I have spoken to so many people who are not shy to express or articulate what they lack and what they need in their communities. Here is what people usually tell me. They talk about affordable food, they talk about clean drinking water, accessible healthcare system, they talk about wanting good education for their children, job opportunities, safety and security. So it's undeniable there are so many basic needs and so many limitations within our systems in the developing countries that those needs really need to be met. But it's obvious that the lasting solutions are desperately needed. So this gap that has been created by our need has now attracted helpers from around the world, especially from the developed world. Some of these helpers have come and they've listened to the people and they've planned their projects based on the needs of the communities. However, this is not the common approach taken by the wealthiest and most prominent donors that we see in the developing world. These are the donors who are reluctant to consider the cultural views and values of their recipients. They are the ones who see the developing world as a cultural vacuum to be filled with their ideas or a fallow land to be cultivated with their ideologies. They come to us with their own visions, with their own definitions of the world. They have their own preconceived initiatives crafted in their own language. And when I say language, I'm not speaking about English, Spanish, French, or German language. I mean amorphous terms that have been wielded into shape by ideological wordsmiths. I mean terms like reproductive rights, bodily autonomy, the right to choose, safe sex, safe abortion. These are florid and even oxymoronic terms that are used now to convey the message of the Western social engineers. This is the common language of the colonial donor masters who approach us with high expectations of compliance by our governments and who deliver strong criticism, in some cases punishment as well, for non-compliance. Anyone who has not paid close attention to the relationship between the powerful foreign aid donors and their recipients in the developing world will actually say that these are conspiracy theories. But one only needs to look a little below the surface to see the evidence and examples of attempt at ideological takeovers through foreign aid. From the mid-1990s, the donor nations started putting much emphasis on funding population and reproductive health programs under the social sector foreign aid. In 1993, they were giving about $610 million to the developing countries for the purpose of population and family planning. But within a short space of 19 years, so by 2012, the total funding allocated to the same population and reproductive health programs had then increased from the $610 million that it was to $12.4 billion with a B. This is an increase of 1,932%. So in total, more than $100 billion has been poured into this agenda in the last 20 years. I am sure that many people of goodwill here will agree with me that this is a very skewed and unbalanced approach. And this is exactly why we will object. And when there is any objection to those of us who champion this cause, to those of them who champion this cause over and above every other issue, they quickly come back to us with the excuse of too many maternal mortalities happening. Too many maternal mortalities. So let me just take a closer look at maternal deaths, because in my region of the world, maternal mortality is actually a very serious thing. There are about 300,000 women around the world each year who die in childbirth or in pregnancy. And 1 in 2 of those cases all happen in the sub-Saharan African region where I come from. So this is quite serious. But what are the root causes of the problem? From well-established research and publications on this issue, the leading cause of maternal deaths in Africa, specifically, without a doubt, is severe bleeding, mostly bleeding after childbirth, causing about 30% of all maternal deaths that we see in our region. This is followed by postpartum infection, which causes about 10% of the deaths, and hypertensive disorders, preeclampsia or eclampsia, which causes about 9% of the death. There are other reasons, but then you come to the bottom of that list to see about 4% of the maternal mortalities in our region that is linked to abortion. So I have brought a document to you just to show you a little bit of how our donors have been acting with us, bearing in mind all these statistics that I have just quoted to you. So this is a document that I will call Exhibit 1, which will demonstrate how our major donors bestow primacy and thereby priority to issues based purely on their own ideology. This is a document entitled Maternal Health, and it was put together by the House of Commons, the British Parliament, the House of Commons, and it's the International Development Committee within the House of Commons that put this together. So this was written for the developing world. So in this whole document, that is 71 pages, bleeding, which causes most of the deaths, most of the maternal deaths, was mentioned 3 times. Infection was mentioned 8 times. Hypertensive disorders was mentioned a total of 2 times. Neonatal and baby were mentioned in collection a total of 6 times. Blood transfusion, blood donation, blood banking, which are all the things that can save the lives of women in the African region who die in childbirth. This was mentioned only 8 times in this document. Contraception, Contraceptive and family planning was mentioned 33 times. Abortion was mentioned 71 times. Again, I actually use this document because it captures in a very clear and incontrovertible way the reality of ideologically driven prioritization. I believe that the UK government is not alone in this unbalanced approach. Most Western donors are working out of the same blueprint. And it is in this way that the discussions about the developing world and the needs of our people has been framed and developed by the donor nations, institutions, and organizations. I attended a number of CSW events at the United Nations last month, and it was horrifying to me sitting on some of those presentations on abortion and abortion rights. So while I was there was something very shocking that happened to me, was that while I was at one of these meetings at the UN a few weeks ago, they handed out to me this. And anybody from Latin America would know what this is. They were radicalizing all the young women who were sitting there pushing for abortion rights in the Latin American region. Even though, yes, this was used very much in Argentina, and I knew that by the time they were sharing this out at the United Nations, the Argentinian Senate, thanks be to God, had voted down something that could have been a horrible abortion law in their country. But still, they were using it. Mind you, this event was not sponsored by Argentina, rather it was sponsored by a European country, Belgium, and it had as a main feature the fight for abortion in Latin American countries, even though the abortion bill had been voted down. Neocolonialism, paternalism, and cultural imperialism, ideological supremacy, all of these exist, and they are in full display in the relationships between the developing countries and the developed countries. The pertinent question is, what are we going to do? Obviously, there is no one-size-fits-all. But there is not even enough time for me to go into what needs to be done. But what I really would want to appeal to you today is that we need to reconsider foreign aid. We need to reconsider the relationships between developed countries that are also donor nations and the developing countries that they are giving money to. How long are our nations going to be aid dependent instead of independent? I hope that this independence will end that this rate of dependence will end in the foreseeable future. In the interim, I sincerely hope to see nations rise to their full stature in their dealings with donors, and I insist on respect for the views and values of the people who they are giving money to. I hope to see them question foreign aid. That is the African leaders, and all the other leaders who are from the developing world, that they should question foreign aid and the budgets astronomically allocated to population control and to family planning. I hope to see them challenge donor nations and organizations that have policies to fund abortions and abortion organizations in nations where abortion is prohibited and largely restricted. I look forward to seeing them reject the notion that someone sitting in an office in a developed country could come up with a sex education program based on their own understanding of human sexuality, and that this program is then implemented worldwide through some lofty international agencies' universal curriculum, just like Sharon had talked about. This paternalism has to end, and it has to end now. Even if we find ourselves at the receiving end of the foreign aid equation, we all deserve respect. But above all, our nations deserve to be truly free, to be truly sovereign, and to be truly, truly independent. Thank you.